I never imagined a family gathering could feel so cold. The moment I stepped into my daughter's house that afternoon, I knew something was wrong. The air inside was heavy, like a storm was about to break. I had come with a small gift. Nothing fancy, just a framed photo of Laura as a child, smiling with 2 missing teeth. I thought it might warm her heart. She barely glanced at it before placing it on the table, face down. "Glad you could finally make it," David said, his tone sharp, his eyes already sizing me up. I ignored it. Over the years, I had learned to let his little barbs slide off my back. But today, his voice had an edge I hadn't heard before. We sat down in the living room. Their 2 children were upstairs, the sound of a video game drifting down the hall. I tried to make small talk, asking about their school, the garden, even the new curtains. Laura's replies were clipped, her gaze fixed on her phone. It didn't take long for the tension to break. David started complaining about the water damage at my apartment. "So, how long do you plan on staying here?" he asked, his words laced with annoyance. "Just until the repairs are finished. A week? Maybe less," I said quietly. "A week?" he scoffed. "Do you think we run a charity?" I blinked, stunned. I didn't think it would be a problem. Laura cut in before I could finish. "Mom, you can't just move in like this. You're not exactly contributing." Her words hit harder than I expected. "Contributing?" I repeated, my voice low. David leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "You don't have much, do you? No job, no income, no purpose. You're just broke and useless," Laura finished for him, her voice cold, almost rehearsed. Something inside me cracked. I opened my mouth to speak, but then I stopped. They wouldn't hear me anyway. I stood slowly, my legs stiff from sitting too long. "I'll leave now," I said, forcing my voice to stay calm. I walked toward the patio door, the quickest way out to the driveway where my car was parked. But before I could reach for the handle, David stepped in front of me. "You're not going to storm out like some martyr," he sneered. "I'm not storming out," I replied, keeping my tone even. "I just don't want to cause more trouble." Laura came up behind me. I felt her presence before I saw her reflection in the glass. "Oh, please," she said. "You've been causing trouble your whole life." I turned my head slightly, ready to step around them. That's when it happened. David's hand brushed against my arm, not a gentle touch, but a shove meant to move me. Laura's hand came next, firmer, pushing me forward. My foot caught on the rug, and before I could catch myself, the glass door shattered around me. The sound was deafening, a sharp, splintering crash that seemed to freeze time. Pain seared through my arms as shards cut into my skin. My knees hit the cold stone of the patio, and warm blood began to trickle down my face. For a moment, no one moved. I could feel their eyes on me, but neither stepped forward. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I pushed myself up slowly, glass crunching under my palms. My reflection in the unbroken side panel showed streaks of red down my cheek and onto my blouse. I looked at them, my daughter and the man she chose to marry, and I saw no flicker of regret in their faces. I said nothing. Not because I had nothing to say, but because words would be wasted. Without a word, I walked past them, down the steps and across the driveway. My car door felt heavy as I pulled it open. I slid into the seat, hands trembling, and started the engine. As I drove away, the sting in my cuts was nothing compared to the ache in my chest. That night, when the house was quiet and the bleeding had stopped, I picked up the phone. I dialed a number I hadn't called in years. When the familiar voice answered, I spoke just 2 words. "It's time." People often think betrayals happen in one sudden moment, a dramatic event, a harsh word, a broken promise. But I know now, they grow slowly, like weeds, creeping in until they choke everything good that was once there. When Laura was born, I was 27 and already used to carrying heavy loads. Her father left before she could take her first steps, so it was just the 2 of us against the world. I worked 2 jobs, mornings at a bakery, nights cleaning offices. There were weeks when my feet ached so badly, I slept with ice packs against them. But when I'd see her little face light up when I walked through the door, every ache felt worth it. We didn't have much, but I gave her the best I could. Private school, even if it meant I went without new clothes for years. Dance lessons because she loved twirling in the living room. I told myself that giving her every opportunity would keep her from ever feeling the kind of scarcity I had known. By the time she turned 18, my small catering business was finally steady. I poured my energy into it. Early mornings, late nights, and endless negotiations with suppliers. There were times I wanted to quit, but I pushed through. 10 years later, I sold that business for a sum that would have made my younger self dizzy. I didn't tell many people the full number. I put the bulk of it, $20 million, into a trust fund with my lawyer, Mark. The trust was airtight, protected from anyone's reach but mine. I wanted that security for my later years. I also wanted to see who stayed in my life without knowing about it. Laura knew I'd sold the business, but she assumed I'd spent most of the money or invested poorly. I never corrected her. I thought foolishly that it might teach her to value people over possessions. Then came David. The first time Laura brought him home, I noticed how carefully he looked around my apartment. His eyes lingered on the furniture, the decor, even the silverware I set on the table. He complimented me often, but his praise was about what I owned, not who I was. At first, he was polite enough. He'd ask about my health, offer to carry groceries. But over time, the tone changed. He'd make comments about how expensive life is these days and how a family should stick together financially. Laura started coming to me with small requests: a loan to cover a temporary expense, money for a down payment on their first house, help with wedding costs that kept inflating. I gave when I could, but I kept my boundaries. I didn't owe David anything. That didn't sit well with him. One day, I overheard him telling Laura in the kitchen, "She's holding out on us. She has more than she says." Laura's voice was softer, almost pleading. "Maybe she's just being careful." "She's being selfish," he replied flatly. "We could use that money to build our future." After that, the requests turned into pressure. They began bringing up old favors, as if the love and care I had given her as a mother were debts to be repaid in cash. The final straw before things truly soured was the heirloom. It was a gold locket my mother had given me when I turned 16. Laura asked if she could have it, for sentimental reasons. I agreed, until I learned David had convinced her to sell it for a vacation. When I confronted her, she shrugged and said, "It was just sitting in your drawer." I didn't recognize the girl standing in front of me. That night, I called Mark, not to act yet, but to make sure everything in the trust was still locked down tight. "It's all secure," he assured me. I thought that might be the end of it. That perhaps, without access, they would stop pushing. But I underestimated how resentment can grow when people convince themselves they've been cheated out of something. David started speaking to me with open disdain. Laura began canceling our lunches, claiming she was too busy. I started receiving fewer and fewer calls from her, unless she needed something. It was like watching a garden I'd tended my whole life be overtaken by thorns. I kept quiet. I didn't defend myself. I wanted to see just how far they would go. And, as I would soon learn, they would go much further than I could have imagined. The change wasn't sudden. It was a slow, creeping thing, like frost forming on a window in the middle of the night. One day you wake up, and the whole view you once had is hidden behind a sheet of cold. After the locket incident, the warmth between us began to thin. David didn't bother hiding his contempt anymore. Whenever I visited, he would toss small insults into the conversation, disguised as jokes. "You know, Evelyn," he said one afternoon as I sat at their kitchen counter, "some people retire because they've earned it. Others retire because, well, there's nothing else for them to do." Laura laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that carried no joy. "David," she said softly, though there was no real reprimand in her voice. I sipped my tea and let the remark pass, but inside I felt another tiny fracture. I began noticing the subtle ways they kept me at arm's length. Dinner invitations became rare. Birthdays were too hectic to celebrate together. When I dropped by unexpectedly, I could feel the shift in the room, like I'd interrupted something I wasn't meant to see. The children, once so excited to see me, began spending more time in their rooms when I came over. It wasn't their fault. Children pick up on the way adults speak about someone. Then there were the whispers. One evening, I stopped by to drop off some books Laura had asked for. As I stepped into the hallway, I heard their voices in the kitchen. I paused, not wanting to intrude, but their words froze me in place. "What's left to get from her?" David's voice was low but sharp. Laura sighed. "I don't know. She's careful." "Careful," he scoffed. "Or stingy. You'd think after everything you've done for her, she'd show some gratitude." "Everything she's done for me?" I almost laughed. My hands tightened around the bag of books. I realized then that they weren't just hoping for more help. They were planning for it, as if it were owed to them. I backed away quietly and left without knocking. That night, I sat on my couch, staring at the quiet street outside my window. A part of me wanted to believe I had misheard, that I'd taken their words out of context. But I'd been around long enough to know when people had begun measuring you not by who you are, but by what you have to give them. It was Olivia, my neighbor, who gave me the clearest picture. She'd lived across the hall from me for over a decade. A retired nurse with a sharp eye and a kinder heart, she had a way of noticing things others missed. I saw Laura the other day. She told me one afternoon as we sat on the balcony with our tea. She was talking to someone in the lobby, said something about how you don't have much left, that you'd have to rely on them soon. I felt the heat rise to my cheeks. "She really said that?" Olivia nodded slowly. "I think they believe it. And people who think someone is helpless, well, they act differently toward them." Her words sat with me long after she left. If they truly thought I was broke, then every cutting remark, every canceled dinner, every cold glance made more sense. In their minds, I was no longer a mother or a person. I was a burden they had to tolerate until I was out of the way. I didn't correct them. I didn't tell them about the trust, the investments, the safety net I had built over decades. Instead, I stayed quiet and watched. I began noticing patterns. How David would steer conversations toward money whenever we were together. How Laura's smile seemed to tighten whenever I didn't offer to pay for something. How they looked at each other when I mentioned needing a repair in my apartment. It wasn't just distance anymore. It was calculation. And as much as it hurt to admit, I knew the frost between us wasn't going to melt. It was only going to spread. When Laura called and invited me to spend the weekend at their place, her voice was unusually bright. "It's been too long, Mom," she said. "Let's have some quality family time." I hesitated. The last few visits had left me with more bruises on my heart than I cared to admit. But a part of me still hoped that maybe, just maybe, this was her trying to mend things. So I said yes. The first few hours were quiet enough. I arrived on Friday evening with a box of Laura's favorite pastries from the bakery downtown. She thanked me, though it was more of a nod than a smile. David was already on the couch, scrolling on his phone. By Saturday morning, it became clear why they'd invited me. I woke early to the sound of Laura's voice in the hallway. She was dressed to go out. "David and I have some errands," she said over breakfast. "Could you watch the kids?" "Of course," I said, though it hadn't been discussed before. Those errands turned into the entire day. I cooked lunch, helped the kids with homework, tidied the kitchen, and folded the laundry they'd left in the dryer. By the time Laura and David returned in the evening, their arms were full of shopping bags. "Thanks for keeping an eye on them," David said casually, as if I were a hired babysitter. Sunday was no different. In the morning, David handed me a list of chores, wiping down the patio furniture, organizing the pantry, since you're so good at it. By dinner, I was tired, but trying to keep my patience. That's when the conversation shifted. We were eating roast chicken when David looked at me and smirked. "You know, Evelyn, for someone who's retired, you sure don't dress like you're enjoying life." Laura chuckled, sipping her wine. "It's true, Mom. You could try harder. No offense." I set my fork down slowly. "Clothes don't matter much to me." David leaned back in his chair. "That's the problem. At your age, you should at least try to look presentable. People start fading when they stop caring." Laura laughed again, and I realized she wasn't going to defend me. Not anymore. I forced myself to finish my meal, though the food tasted like cardboard. Later that evening, I felt lightheaded and decided I should go home early. I went to the kitchen where Laura was putting away dishes. "I think I'll leave in the morning," I said. "I'm not feeling my best." She didn't look up from the plate in her hand. "So soon? We were just getting used to having you around." David, who was leaning in the doorway, smirked. Broke people always find excuses to cut things short. The words hit me like a slap. I gripped the counter to steady myself. I wanted to ask him why he was being so cruel, to ask Laura how she could stand by while he spoke to me like that. But I swallowed the words. I knew now that there was no misunderstanding between us. They had made up their minds about me. That night, I lay awake in the guest room, staring at the ceiling. Every sound in the house, the hum of the fridge, the creak of the floorboards, felt amplified. The next day would be different. I didn't know how, but something in me was shifting, and I could feel that the end of this long, slow decay was coming, sooner than they expected. The morning air was sharp and cold, even inside the house. I woke early, already dressed, my bag packed. I thought I might be able to slip out quietly, but fate had other plans. I came down the stairs to find Laura and David already in the kitchen. Laura was at the sink, rinsing a mug. David leaned against the counter, sipping coffee. "You're up early," David said without warmth. "I thought I'd head home before traffic," I replied, keeping my voice even. Laura dried her hands. "You didn't even have breakfast. You could at least stay for that." I didn't want breakfast. I wanted to leave. But to keep the peace, I set my bag down and poured myself some tea. The conversation started small, the weather, the kids' school schedules, but it didn't take long before David found his opening. "You know," he began, "Laura and I were talking last night. You've been keeping to yourself a lot. Makes people wonder." "Makes people wonder what?" I asked, though my tone was calm. "That maybe you're embarrassed," he said. "You used to be able to help us out here and there. Now, well, you can barely manage your own life." Laura glanced at him but didn't tell him to stop. I set my cup down. "That's not true." He smirked. "Of course it's not true, if you're the one saying it. But we can all see it, Evelyn. You're broke, you're old, and well, what do you really have left?" The words were sharp, but it was his tone, smug, almost amused, that made my stomach turn. "David," I started, but before I could finish, Laura stepped closer. "Mom, it's just reality," she said. "You should be grateful we even invite you over. Not everyone would take in someone who's not useful anymore." Something inside me went very still. I picked up my bag and turned toward the door. "I think I've overstayed my welcome." David moved faster than I expected, stepping in front of me. "Not so fast. You're going to walk out after we've been nothing but honest with you?" "I'm going home," I said. It happened in an instant. He shoved me, hard, and I stumbled backward into the sliding glass door that led to the patio. The glass exploded around me in a shower of bright, razor-edged shards. The sound was deafening. A single crack, followed by the rush of breaking pieces hitting the floor. Pain flared along my arms, my hands, my cheek. I could feel warm blood beginning to slide down the side of my face. Laura gasped but didn't move toward me. Instead, she just stood there, arms folded, eyes cold. David looked down at me with a smirk. "See? You can't even stand on your own 2 feet." For a moment, I couldn't speak. The metallic taste of fear and something darker filled my mouth. My pulse roared in my ears. But I didn't say a word. I slowly got to my feet, glass crunching under my shoes. My hands trembled as I brushed the shards from my coat. "Are you just going to stand there?" I asked Laura quietly. She didn't answer. The blood was warm on my skin, tracing its way down my jaw. My reflection in the shards looked like someone I didn't recognize. Pale, worn, but steady. Without another word, I walked past them, out through the patio, and around to the front of the house. Every step felt deliberate, measured. I didn't let them see the tears that burned behind my eyes. That night, In the quiet of my apartment, I pressed a towel to the cuts on my face and stared at the phone for a long moment before dialing. When my lawyer answered, I said only one sentence. It's time. The night felt unusually still after I hung up the phone with my lawyer. My apartment was dim, the only light coming from the small lamp by the couch. I could still feel the sting from the cuts on my cheek, but the sharper pain was deeper, somewhere words couldn't reach. "Are you sure?" my lawyer had asked when I called. "Because once I initiate this, there's no undoing it." I was sure, more sure than I'd ever been about anything. We spoke for nearly an hour, going over the terms of the trust my late husband and I had set up decades ago. They had been designed to protect my assets, not just for me, but for those who treated me with respect. Certain clauses had been added, clauses Laura and David had never known about. By midnight, every step was in motion. My lawyer contacted the trust manager, who began executing the necessary freezes and restrictions. The property deed, the joint accounts, the investments tied to my name, all of it was secured. At 2 a.m., the final confirmation came through. Your assets are locked. Disbursement halted until further notice. No withdrawals permitted. I sat back in my chair, a strange calm settling over me. It wasn't joy. It wasn't revenge. It was something colder, the kind of resolve that comes when you've been pushed to the edge and finally decide you won't fall. The next morning, the storm began. My phone started buzzing at 8:15 a.m. The first call was from Laura. I didn't answer. Then a text came through. "Mom, something's wrong with the house account. Call me." By 8:30, David was calling. I ignored him too. A second later, another text. "The bank says the mortgage payment bounced. What's going on?" I sipped my coffee slowly, letting the warmth spread through me. At 9:05, my lawyer called to confirm that the house, which had been partially funded through the trust, was now frozen as collateral. They couldn't sell it. They couldn't refinance it. They couldn't even make changes to the insurance without my signature. By 10 hour, my voicemail was full. Laura's voice went from confused to panicked, then angry. David's messages were shorter, sharper. "What did you do?" one of his texts read. Another, "You think this will stop us?" I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my email. The trust statement sat there like a quiet guardian. $20 million. Untouchable. Not by them. Not by anyone I didn't allow. I thought about the years I'd spent quietly funding their comforts, the down payment on their house, the school tuition for their children, the trips they never thanked me for. I had given because I loved them, because I believed in family. But love is not a blank check. By noon, I knew they had tried to access one of the investment accounts. My lawyer forwarded me the bank's rejection notice. Unauthorized attempt. Account holder's consent required. Somewhere between the buzzing phone and the quiet hum of my fridge, I felt something unexpected. Relief. It wasn't about hurting them. It was about finally drawing a line they could no longer cross. I spent the rest of the afternoon in silence. No TV, no music. Just the sound of my own breathing and the distant city traffic. By evening, I knew they would come to see me, and I knew the conversation would be ugly. But this time, I wouldn't be the one bleeding. This time, they'd be the ones facing the shatter. They arrived just as the sun was setting. I had been expecting them all day. The sharp knock on my door was no surprise. What did surprise me was how quickly David started pounding when I didn't answer immediately. "Evelyn, open the door right now!" His voice was sharp, jagged, like glass ready to break. I took my time crossing the small living room. I opened the door just enough to see their faces. Laura's was pale, her eyes wide with desperation. David's jaw was tight, his posture stiff with barely contained anger. "Mom," Laura began, "we need to talk, now." I stepped aside, letting them in. David brushed past me without so much as a glance. Laura followed, wringing her hands. The tension was thick. I could hear the faint hum of my refrigerator and the muffled traffic outside, every sound sharper in the silence between us. "Do you think this is funny?" David asked, turning to face me. "You froze the accounts. You locked us out of our own house. You—" "It's not your house," I interrupted softly. Laura flinched at my tone. "Excuse me?" David said, his voice rising. It's not your house, I repeated. It was bought with money from the trust. The same trust you both have been bleeding dry for years. The same trust you thought would keep feeding you forever, no matter how you treated me. David scoffed, but I saw the flicker in his eyes. Fear. Laura stepped forward. Mom, we made a mistake. We said things we shouldn't have, but you can't just ruin us over one argument. One argument? My voice was still calm, but I could feel the steel in it now. Laura, you stood there while your husband shoved me through a glass door. You watched blood run down my face, and you said nothing. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Do you know what I felt in that moment? I continued. Not pain, not shock. I felt clarity. Because that was the moment I realized you didn't see me as your mother anymore. You saw me as a bank. And when the bank wasn't enough, you thought you could break it. David took a step toward me. You think you're so smart, don't you? Well, what happens when you're alone, huh? No family, no one to look after you. I've been alone for a long time, I said. But I won't be disrespected in my own life. I won't finance my own humiliation. Laura's voice cracked. We have kids, Mom. Do you want them to lose their home? I looked at her for a long moment. I didn't take your home from you. You did that the moment you treated me like I was less than human. She turned away, wiping her eyes. David muttered something under his breath. I walked to the small side table near the couch and picked up an envelope. I handed it to Laura. What's this? She asked, hesitating. Instructions, I said. For how to rebuild without me. The trust is locked. You'll receive nothing from it now or in the future. You will stand on your own 2 feet, the way you told me I should. Laura's hands shook as she took the envelope. David snorted. Fine, we don't need your money. But the tremor in his voice betrayed him. I walked to the door and opened it wide. Then we have nothing left to discuss. For a moment, Laura looked like she might say something else, an apology perhaps, but she didn't. She simply turned and walked out. David followed, his footsteps heavy. I closed the door quietly behind them. For the first time in years, the apartment felt warm. I walked to the window and watched them get into their car. As the engine started and they drove away, a strange peace settled over me. The glass door was gone. The blood had been washed away. But the line I had drawn, that would stay. And so would I.